Mark Andryczyk. I am one of the translators of My Final Territory, selected essays by Yuri Andrukhovych. I am not the only translator of the book. There are three of us. Michael Naydan, myself, and Vitaly Chernetsky are the three translators whose translations are presented in this book. Michael Naydan translated a long essay, Central Eastern Revision. I translated 11 essays, and Vitaly Chernetsky translated one essay for this volume. A lot of Yuri Andrukhovych's prose, his novels, have been translated already in English and published, and some wonderful translations. And most recently, his poetry has been published as well, and it had appeared in English language translations in various forms and journals over the years. But essays had not been addressed, and the English language reader did not have access to this genre of Yuri's works, which is his favorite genre, by the way. So it's something that needed to be addressed so that people kind of get the full sense of Yuri's work. Now, I mentioned Central Eastern Revision. I had been teaching contemporary Ukrainian literature for over 10 years, and I had always given my students an essay by Andrukhovych that Michael Naydan had translated that was called Within Time Down the River. What it was a translation of an early version of Central Eastern Revision with this long essay. And I had always been asking around, as for Michael Naydan, who translated it, maybe finish translating, add what's been added by Yuri into this new version of the essay, so I could give that to my students to give for the full essay, because the full version is wonderful. What Yuri added to it was fantastic. So Mikhailo, being a veteran of translations, had a great idea. It's like, yeah, I'll do that, but why don't you translate a bunch of more essays and we'll put out a book, and instead of just having an essay. And I said, okay, and that's how we got to putting out a book of this. And then, of course, Vitaly's translation was also added. And like everything else I translate, the reason I translate things is because I want my students to have something that I've read in the original and that hasn't been translated. I want them, if they don't read in Ukrainian, to have access to this work. And to my friends who don't read Ukrainian, I say, hey, you got to read this. So those are, the reasons why we ended up working on this book. Yeah, it's really interesting, my experience with translating Andrukhovych. He's one of my favorite writers, and his language, his Ukrainian language, is just a joy to read, and it just flows, like a Mick Taylor guitar solo. It just keeps going, and it seems seemingly no effort. But when I got to actually translating it, I realized how complex it actually is, and how much craft there is. And that's, I remember my professor at University of Toronto, Max Tarnowski, we talked about this, and he's like, yeah, this is what, makes somebody a really good writer. It can be so complex and well crafted, but it reads so easily. And maybe as a reader, you enjoy that. You have that joy, that sense of joy as a reader, which we all, gravitate towards. But when you start to translate it, you get to see, the scaffolding and how it's put together, and you see how really complex it is. And that's a challenge. And that's a challenge to pass that along in English. When I translate, of course, you're trying to pass along, especially these are essays. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of historical allusions, and there's a lot of fake historical allusions too, because it is Andrukhovych. But you really want to pass along the mood. Besides passing all that along, you really kind of, I want my reader of my translation to get the same mood that I get from reading the book in the original. So that's very important. But again, because these are essays, there was a lot of looking up. Yuri's very well versed in European world culture. There's a lot of allusions for what me, some of them were quite obscure, or figures that I didn't know. So in this case, I had to add a lot of footnotes to kind of explain those things, because where they were important for understanding the gist of the essay, and again, the style, the feel, I I had to add that. So that was a little different than translating, let's say, a novel or a novella. Yeah, that's the beauty of working with contemporary writers. You don't have to have a seance and talk to a writer, at the beginning of the 20th century and ask some questions. What do you think of that? No, Yuri's wonderful to work with. I've translated other authors too, but his English is very good. And he really spends the time going through and if there are questions, advising how to get things across. And this was a labor of love. I was translating these for a while, not knowing if it would be published. So it took quite a while. And over the years, we met with Yuri several times in Lviv, in Ivano-Frankivsk, in the Carpathians, in Philadelphia, New York, where we could actually sit down and work out some of these more difficult areas. So that was a huge, huge plus. Yuri's works are usually first translated in Polish or German, and basically everything he's written has been translated. And after having published his first few essays and then other things, I think he knew that these things would be published, at least in those two European languages. I don't think he had any specific idea that these would come out in English. Over the years, possibly, maybe informed his work. But what's worth mentioning is because these are essays, there's a very interesting aspect to them. In the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell apart, and I talk about this a bit in my monograph, Yuri's generation of writers, because of this kind of collapse of everything, they became at quite a young age these public intellectuals. They were filling a void. And what that means is that people like Oksana Zabushko and Yuri and others would travel to the West and represent Ukraine. Yuri would be representing Ukraine in the West, and this ends up informing his essays. And a lot of these essays, geography is a major subject in these, and so I tie them. He was an envoy or a messenger of sorts. He experiences the world in these essays, and he's mapping. He's putting Ukraine on the map of Europe in these essays. That's a lot of what he's doing. So this idea of geography, of travel, of mapping is all over these essays. So, it's inherent, to answer your question, where he thinks it would be read. It was writing about the West for Ukraine, obviously, because he's writing these in Ukrainian, but he's making these connections also. And then when these essays come out in these various languages, the circle is complete in a certain way. When I began translating, I was a lot more I was very afraid of getting too far away from the original texts, translating everything exactly. But when I was a fellow at Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute working on my monograph, I was lucky to meet with Volodymyra Dibrova, a Ukrainian writer who teaches there. And I was working, one of the works I focus on in my monograph is one of his novels, Burdik, and I was translating parts of it. So I would ask him, and his English is excellent as well. And we talked about aspects, and he's the one that told me, and this was very important. It's very simple, but I keep this in mind also, and this is what I would tell my students. He says, as an author, I want to sound normal. I want to sound cool in English. That's what's really important for me. So that's when I talk about passing along the mood. That's what I mean. The humor, the style of an author. And that was very important. I remember that back then, and I try to do this with every subsequent translation I work on. I try to keep that. Now, there are certain things where you can really just have fun with the translation. Again, working with Yuri, I got to ask, and we had, bounce ideas off each other. For instance, there's an essay in this book, in My Final Territory, which is actually entitled My Final Territory. And I was lucky because it was a speech he delivered in 1999 in Lviv, at Lviv University, and I was actually there when he premiered this. I just happened to be there and heard. I didn't know he'd be translating this 15 years later. But there's a section, he was asked to defend postmodernism, and there's a wonderful section where he does an alphabet in Ukrainian language, all the way down, and he just lists a word in each language where he uses kind of a cliche or a characteristic term of postmodernism. So how do you translate that in English, right? There's different ways you can approach that. And was thinking of various ways. Do you recreate the sound? Do you do this? So we decided to do it in English, and I just came up with English words. And of course, the letters don't all match up. But the beauty of this, since it is an essay on postmodernism, and since Yuri is a wonderful author who performs beautifully, when we were presenting this book in Boston a few years ago at a conference, Yuri was there, and we performed a text where he would read in Ukrainian, his word, and I start his word. And then we went back and forth, and we were kind of surprised when we practiced it before we went on, how funny it was when you go back and forth. So you can have fun with these things too. And sometimes the translation adds another element to it, an essay like that, it just added to it, and it was a joy. Just very recently, I began translating Yuri Andrukovych's latest novel, which is called Radio. It was just published in mid-December of 2020, and it's a very interesting story. It deals with a revolution that was squashed. It deals with immigration, and it deals with somebody who played piano during a revolution, who is in hiding and has a nighttime radio program, which nobody knows from where. But so it's interactive. There's music that you listen along to when you read this novel. And as a former radio DJ and a musician, this was just too dear to me not to translate. But it's a work in progress. It's going to take a while, but that's what I'll be working on in the coming year, at least. Thanks, Bill. It's good to see you. Yeah, try myself. All goodness. Bye-bye.